Imagine if the foundations of human history you've always known were missing crucial pieces. Picture the world's earliest writings, etched into clay long before anyone dreamed of building the pyramids, holding a tale that's bizarre, intricate, and remarkably coherent, making it harder to brush off as pure myth than to consider it real. This evening, we'll dive into those ancient documents side by side. We'll explore them without the slant of one contemporary scholar, sticking as true as possible to the source materials via faithful translations. Our journey traces the Anunnaki from the initial Sumerian clay tablets onward to Babylonian versions across excavated sites and celestial annotations, and into the eerie worldwide motif of deities who landed, instructed, shaped life, and eventually escaped our world in a frantic rush. As the old writers portrayed with stark clarity, we'll meticulously separate the text's direct statements from what established academia confirms, noting precisely where solid proof gives way to conjecture. Get comfortable, ease your breath. This tale unfolds over millennia and vast distances, with every nuance counting more than you might guess. Grasping the Anunnaki demands knowing the roots of their narrative first, and that origin story ranks among today's most captivating scholarly quests. Back in the mid-1800s, an autodidact British language expert called Henry Rawlinson scaled a sheer rock wall at Behistun in western Iran, transcribing carvings left by the ancient Persian ruler Darius the Great, circa 520 BCE. That multilingual text in Old Persian Elamite and Babylonian cuneiform drew Rawlinson's initial focus to the Persian part for years. Then, shifting to the Babylonian, he unlocked a tongue silent for almost 2 millennia. Akkadian, that Semitic script in wedge-like cuneiform marks, sprang back to life. Thanks to Akkadian, experts unearthed an even more ancient dialect hidden within. Sumerian, the voice of humanity's inaugural literate society, a linguistic oddity with no kin in any known family, an isolate that burst forth abruptly in southern Iraq's wetlands around 3400 BCE, bearing a body of work that's profoundly advanced and otherworldly. These writings survived not in one spot, but surfaced from scores of digs spanning modern Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and Iran. The vast collection at Ashurbanipal's library in Nineveh, unearthed by Austin Henry Laird and his colleague Hormuz Rassam during the 1850s, unearthed more than 30,000 tablets and shards. Nippur's sacred storerooms, dug up by the University of Pennsylvania from 1888 onward, added thousands upon thousands. Probed by Leonard Woolley in the 1920s and 1930s, exposed not just the renowned royal graves hinting at widespread ritual killings, but also bureaucratic and poetic documents covering ages. Eridu, Uruk, Lagash, Girsu, Shuruppak. Each location supplied fragments to a mosaic that researchers have pieced together for well over 150 years. Step back, and that mosaic forms a chronicle that conventional scholars label as legend, yet in its raw essence, it unfolds more like an engineering log. The term Anunnaki surfaces in our oldest Sumerian writings, from tablets around 2900 BCE, though the spoken lore they capture predates that by ages. Its roots have sparked endless debate. The leading academic view, built on insights from Sumerologists such as Thorkild Jacobson and Samuel Noah Kramer, renders it roughly as offspring of the royal line of Anu, or princely seed. Anu, the top sky god in Sumerian lore, patriarch of the divine assembly, whose title just signifies sky or firmament. Thus, the Anunnaki emerge as sky-born heirs, heaven's progeny who venture down from the stars to our soil. A bolder take, championed above all by Zecharia Sitchin, starting with his 1976 volume The 12th Planet, dissects the term into syllables and yields something like underscore, quote, underscore to, underscore Orthodox Assyriologists. Figures like Michael Heiser included dismiss this breakdown as phonetically baseless, claiming Sitchin's grasp of Sumerian syntax crumbles under expert analysis. They're likely spot on regarding the word's precise derivation. Yet here's the intriguing part. No matter how you dissect the name, the accounts invariably depict these entities as sky descended to ground level. The deeds and tales linked to the Anunnaki align seamlessly with that disputed rendering. Regardless of the etymological origins, these entities originated from the heavens. They made their way to our world. The ancient writings align strikingly on this detail. The divine assembly outlined in these sources isn't the nebulous, all-encompassing spiritual force seen in subsequent one-God faiths. Instead, it's an organized system, a structured authority with defined leadership lines, assigned roles, recorded conflicts among divisions, and dynamics akin to workplace negotiations. At the top sits Anu, the father of the skies, governing from his heavenly domain and seldom venturing down to the ground. Beneath him are his two key offspring. Enlil, meaning Lord of the Air or Lord of Authority, acted as the primary overseer on the planet. The accounts depict him as inflexible, commanding, fixated on structure and obedience, prone to wrath when his power faces resistance. Picture the strictest business leader imaginable, the sort who enforces every rule, allows no straying from procedures, and prefers to dismantle a botched operation rather than risk it spiraling unchecked. That's Enlil. Next comes Enki, referred to as Ea in subsequent Akkadian writings. His title roughly means Lord of the Soil or Lord of the Fresh Waters. Enki serves as the innovator in the godly lineage, the inventor, the fixer of issues. While Enlil rules by edict, Enki leads through clever solutions. Where Enlil meets challenges with power, Enki counters them with fresh ideas. The friction between these siblings, pitting rule against smarts, rigidity against imagination, fuels many Sumerian tales. It's among the earliest recorded clashes between brothers in written history, with ripples that alter the path of humankind. In these stories, joining the main male figures is Ninhursag, the goddess of birth, appearing under names like Nintu, Ninma, or Mami, depending on the era and region, but always recognized by her role. She's the expert in life's formation and propagation, equipped with the precise abilities to mold organic forms, far from just an emblem of fruitfulness, as some later societies simplified her. The Sumerian tales portray her as a skilled practitioner, a vital contributor whose knowledge proves crucial to the endeavor that birthed humanity. These four, Anu, Enlil, Enki, and Ninhursag, represent the heart of the Sumerians' great gods. Yet, they weren't isolated. The writings clearly separate two tiers of celestial entities: the Anunnaki themselves, the elder deities, the planners who gathered in the heavenly assembly to decree destinies, and the Igigi, a label whose roots scholars still debate, but one that plainly marks a lower tier: the operatives, the toilers, the everyday divine workforce executing the directives from above. Grasping the divide between Anunnaki and Igigi matters deeply, as it's the Igigi revolt, the insurrection by the godly laborers, that ignites the sequence culminating in our species' emergence. The scattered yet unified depictions of these figures across the texts paint a unified image that's captivating and profoundly alien. They're portrayed as towering presences, far surpassing typical human size. They carry what the Sumerian language terms melam, often rendered as splendor or sacred glow, an enveloping brilliance around their forms so powerful that mortals supposedly needed safeguards or readiness to gaze upon them. Their durations of life, as noted in the Sumerian king list, span what appear as staggeringly long epochs, tens of millennia, for single rulers. The king list qualifies as an authentic historical artifact, with duplicates housed in institutions worldwide, such as the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford and the Iraq Museum in Baghdad. Its final sections align with attested monarchs backed by separate evidence. But the initial parts, the pre-flood era, enumerate sovereigns reigning for tens of thousands of years, summing to 241,200 years of pre-flood rule in one variant. Whether these numbers denote actual durations, emblematic time periods, or an unfamiliar counting method stays a major enigma in Sumerology. Still, the document lays them out plainly as routine official logs. Now, let's examine the core creation story as presented in the texts, where the details grow remarkably precise, distinguishing it from most other civilizations' origin legends. The Atrahasis epic, our fullest version of the human genesis, was initially penned in Akkadian circa 1700 BCE, though it relies on far earlier Sumerian materials. The definitive version of the epic came out in 1969, courtesy of Assyriologist Wilfrid Lambert and epigrapher Alan Millard, and their edition still serves as the cornerstone of academic interpretations. Rather than starting with the birth of the universe or the division between sky and ground, the story kicks off amid a workers' strike, where the deities themselves handled the heavy lifting and hauling in place of humans. It portrays the divine burden as overwhelming, the tasks as grueling, and the hardships as excessive. This kickoff to one of the earliest surviving tales from human history feels remarkably like the record of a labor union session. The Igigi, those lower-ranking gods, had toiled for what the narrative calls 40 eras, a figure that probably signifies an endless stretch rather than a precise tally, tackling the exhausting manual jobs demanded by the Anunnaki. That included carving out canals, clearing riverbeds, and digging irrigation ditches to turn the wetlands of southern Mesopotamia into fertile fields. Deeper still, the accounts mention extraction efforts in an area known as the Abzu. The term Abzu demands nuance, as it shifts meanings depending on the context. Cosmologically, it's mainly the ancient underground sea of fresh water, thought to lie below the planet's crust, and ruled by Enki, feeding all wells and streams. Enki's sanctuary in Eridu went by the name Abzu, or the Abzu's dwelling. Yet in some storylines, it points to a particular spot for mining activities. Sitchin, in a bold and disputed claim, linked it to Southeast Africa, citing old gold deposits in places like Swaziland and South Africa, with geological data pushing mining dates back way before what traditional archaeology allows for early humans. Such a link stays purely conjectural, lacking backing from established archaeology or language experts, though the proof of mining in the texts holds firm. The Atrahasis epic and its companion pieces repeatedly show the Igigi engaged in resource-gathering toil in the Abzu, no matter its exact nature or site. What they extracted and the reason behind it form one of the biggest gaps in the surviving documents. The records confirm that digging happened, that it was punishing, and that the gods became worn out and bitter about it, yet they skip any clear mention of the substance involved or its intended use. Gold crops up often in Sumerian writings as something of immense value. Deities connect to it closely, sanctuaries glittered with it. The original Sumerian term for gold, kur.gi, shows up in passages implying deeper roles than just ornamentation. Still, The narratives offer no insight into why a sophisticated society would crave so much of one substance. That omission has sparked endless theories, though nothing can be verified solely from the writings. What stands clear is the fallout when the miners hit their limit. The Igigi rallied at the entrance to Enlil's shrine in a coordinated uprising, detailed with striking precision in the account. They set their implements ablaze, not just halting operations, but ritually demolishing the very tools of their drudgery, a gesture ensuring no easy resumption. They encircled Enlil's home and stood firm, unwilling to leave. The epic captures the ensuing exchange. Enlil, staying in line with his nature, pushed for quelling the revolt by pinpointing the instigators and punishing them harshly as warnings. A heavenly assembly gathered to settle the matter, however. Enki stepped forward with a game-changing idea. If the Igigi balked at the labor, invent replacements tailored for it. A being smart enough for tool use and directive following, yet finite in lifespan, controllable in ways immortals couldn't be. Quote 3. Enki urged the gathered divinities. Quote 4. The council approved the plan, and Ninhursag, the expert in birthing, teamed up with Enki to launch the process. The making of this new entity, as laid out in the Atrahasis epic, carries a stark, almost medical detachment that has impressed scholars ever since Lambert and Millard's rendering. It calls for sacrificing a god, not any random one, but one endowed with a trait rendered as intellect, comprehension, or reasoning power. The selected figure went by Wee-Ilu or Geshtu, varying by version, a deity noted for its smarts, whose essence in blood and body would infuse the divine spark into the fresh creation. The sacred essence got blended with clay, sourced from the subterranean waters of the Absu, yielding a fused material that united otherworldly vitality with earthly foundation. That blend got split into 14 shares, with 7 earmarked for males and 7 for females. These shares were then inserted into the bodies of 14 surrogate birth goddesses to nurture them through gestation. Following a duration akin to a standard human pregnancy, the initial humans emerged into existence. Go back and examine that method once more, paying close attention. For now, bracket off the question of whether it recounts actual happenings or metaphorical ones. Just register its elements. A fount of hereditary stuff from a smart contributor. Its pairing with a base medium. Separation into gendered branches, insertion into proxy bearers, delivery. This isn't the origin story of a society picturing a deity waving a hand to conjure people from void. Instead, it's a methodical rundown outlining precise stages in a clear order, involving particular ingredients and particular experts handling particular duties. It comes across more as a lab manual than a devotional chant. The Assyriologist John Botterero, a leading expert on Mesopotamian writings during the 1900s, highlighted this odd trait in his examination of the document, pointing out how the origin tale possesses an unusually precise technical flavor that sets it apart from the founding legends of nearby societies. The goal behind this making is spelled out plainly and bluntly in various ancient records. People were crafted for toil. They were built to shoulder the workload that the Igigi had balked at doing. The Sumerian composition called Enki and Ninmah expands on this via a segment that feels nearly like quality control checks. Once the first run of humans comes off the line, Enki and Ninhursag dive into what looks like a rivalry in crafting. Each vies to surpass the other by producing different human types. Ninhursag fashions figures with diverse bodily constraints, and Enki devises practical jobs for everyone. Then Enki brings forth a creature so weak and inept that Ninhursag can't spot any purpose for it. The exchange carries a touch of godly wit, a light-hearted banter among peers. Yet beneath the fun lurks an unsettling undertone. Humanity's forging entailed trials, mistakes, alternative models evaluated and gauged for practicality. We were beta-tested. Still, the writings hold on to a detail that muddies the straightforward tale of people as built-up laborers. The godly blood stirred into our origins brought along the trait of teu, wit, and comprehension. This seems to have been essential, so the fresh entities could serve as effective toilers. Soulless machines couldn't excavate channels, oversee watering setups, or tackle the intricate jobs demanded by urban life. The making had to include enough smarts to be productive, which in turn meant enough brains to ponder, to challenge, to emote, to crave more than what the makers planned. And this built-in tension, the demand for clever underlings happy to stay subjugated, emerged as the core weakness in the whole Anunnaki venture on our planet, based on the path laid out in the sources. Temporarily, the setup held up. The fresh-made humans slaved away in the farmlands, waterways, and quarries the Igigi had ditched. The deities took satisfaction in their fix. The Atrahasis epic portrays a stretch of equilibrium after the making. A kind of prosperous era where the heavenly hierarchy ran smoothly as planned, makers up high and made ones down low, all sticking to their assigned parts. The urban centers of southern Mesopotamia started forming in this era. Per the accounts, Eridu, Uruk, Ur, Nippur, Shuruppak, Lagash, each got linked to a sponsoring god whose shrine anchored community activities. Digs in the ground have verified these as some of the planet's earliest spots for ongoing city living. Eridu, seen in Sumerian lore as the inaugural settlement, bears signs of use reaching to about 5,400 BCE, featuring layers of shrines stacked atop one another across ages, all sticking to the same core building layout as though bound to an unchangeable design. Leonard Woolley's digs there in the 1920s uncovered a society of stunning refinement, marked by hints of cutting-edge metalwork, intricate governance setups, far-reaching commerce links, and creative feats that popped up abruptly in the dig records. It's worth lingering on this, since it ties into one of the real enigmas in Mesopotamian digs. The Sumerians appeared to show up in southern Mesopotamia equipped with a strikingly full set of tools for building a society: literacy, arithmetic, celestial studies, building techniques, metalworking, water management systems, laws, stories, and organized governance. Archaeologists usually trace the slow evolution of these skills across generations, from the Ubaid era through the Uruk phase and into the early dynastic age, following a clear progression. Material evidence supports this steady growth in the records. Yet, there are breaks in the pattern, sudden leaps where skills emerge faster than the stepwise theory allows. Take the shift from simple clay tokens for tracking goods to the full system of cuneiform script. It unfolded so quickly that experts still scratch their heads over it. The star lore in the oldest writings implies long years of careful sky watching, yet the timeline struggles to fit it all in. The Sumerian records of their rulers leave no doubt on this score. Kingship came down from the skies. Society's foundations were bestowed by the divine, not pieced together by mortal hands. Theologically, you can interpret that as you will, but it aligns with the digs showing Sumerian culture bursting forth fully formed, begging for some kind of answer. Allow your breath to ease into an even flow. Feel the subtle pressure of these old tales brushing your mind without forcing any answers. We're nearing the turning point in the tale, where the whole dynamic shifts, where the bond between deities and mortals starts to crack, where a choice gets made that will transform everything. According to the writings, friction built up between the Anunnaki and the people they shaped, stretching over ages, maybe hundreds or thousands of years as the Sumerians recount. The Atrasis epic pins the rough trigger on the boom in human numbers. People bred rapidly, they expanded everywhere. They overcrowded the land in ways that caught their makers off guard or pushed beyond plans. Enlil, the top overseer, got more and more agitated by what the story labels the Hubaru of humankind, a term often rendered as clamor, though experts like Wilfried Lambert argue it hints at deeper issues like societal chaos, breaches in sacred rites, or just the raw energy of a population surging past limits. Enlil's counter was to curb numbers via disasters. The Atrasis narrative outlines 3 failed bids. First came disease. He unleashed a plague on people, but Enki, the engineer who cherished his handiwork, guided his loyal follower, Atrahasis, to gather folks in appeals to Namar, the plague deity, and the scourge ended. Next, dry spells and hunger. Enlil cut off the downpours. Once more, Enki stepped in, teaching Atrahasis rituals to call back the rains. Then, a wider starvation, blocking several godly provisions at once. Enki still saved the day for humanity. Whenever Enlil tried to thin or wipe out the population, Enki thwarted him, building a cycle of rising stakes that climaxed in the ultimate step. Yet, before diving into the deluge, which calls for its full exploration, there's one more twist in the accounts that carried just as much weight: the mixing of godly and mortal bloodlines. Sumerian and Akkadian fragments offer scattered but steady nods to intimate links between divinities and humans. The standout case in wider lore shows up in Genesis 6, recounting how the sons of God eyed the human women, found them fair, and took whichever they wanted as wives. These pairings produced the Nephilim, a Hebrew term that sparked endless debate. It might stem from Naphal, meaning to drop, implying the fallen, or from another source evoking giants or warriors. The passage paints these hybrids as ancient legends, famed figures. Gilgamesh, the mythic ruler of Uruk, whose saga stands as the earliest long-form tale in literature, gets portrayed as 2/3 god, 1/3 man, offspring of the goddess Ninsun, and a mortal ruler called Lugalbanda. Debate lingers on Gilgamesh's factual basis. The Sumerian king list places him as the 5th monarch of Uruk's initial dynasty, reigning 126 years. Later, Uruk rulers' carvings treat him as real, not just fable. Scholars argue if an actual leader named Gilgamesh inspired the myths, or if he's pure invention. For our purposes, though, the key is the lore's view of these divine human blends. They were exceptional. These hybrids displayed abilities that far exceeded typical human limits, and their very presence challenged the divide between the divine makers and their human creations, a development that troubled certain members of the heavenly assembly. The Book of Enoch, mainly surviving through its Ge'ez version in Ethiopia, and accepted as scripture by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, while dismissed by nearly all other Christian groups, offers the richest depiction in ancient literature of this forbidden mixing and its fallout. Specifically, the section titled The Book of the Watchers, which experts date to around the 3rd century BCE, despite roots in earlier lore, recounts how a band of celestial figures known as the Watchers or Grigori came down to Earth, wedded mortal women, and sired a breed of colossal beings dubbed the Nephilim. Beyond that, the account reveals how these Watchers shared prohibited wisdom with humankind. For instance, Azazel instructed on metalworking and weaponry. Samyaza passed on spells and plant lore. Amaros revealed ways to break enchantments. Barakel shared insights into the stars. Every watcher imparted a specialized field of learning that the narrative portrays as dangerously premature, secrets unveiled before humanity was mature enough to wield them wisely. In Enoch's view, this led to a profound decay in human conduct and biology, setting the stage for the deluge. The offspring from these unions were massive entities with insatiable hungers, devouring all of humankind's output before preying on people themselves. The ensuing turmoil and savagery grew so intolerable that the gods' council concluded a total overhaul was essential. Here we reach the deluge itself, the central turning point in this saga. Pay close attention, because the ancient writings reveal facets of the flood that clash with the straightforward tale of godly retribution we often heard growing up. Flood stories appear in no fewer than 3 key Mesopotamian forms. There's the fragmented Sumerian tale starring Ziusudra, then the Atrahasis epic, our fullest surviving pre-biblical rendition. And finally, the flood segment in Tablet 11 of the Epic of Gilgamesh, centered on Utnapishtim, which stunned the 19th century world when George Smith, a British museum scholar, decoded it in 1872, spotting its striking resemblance to the Genesis account. And reports claim he got so thrilled that he started stripping right there in the museum's reading area. The overlaps between these Mesopotamian and biblical flood tales are far too many and precise to stem from chance, leading biblical experts building on analyses like Alexander Heidel's 1946 volume, The Gilgamesh Epic, and Old Testament Parallels, which still shapes the field, generally agree that Genesis borrowed from or evolved alongside these prior Mesopotamian sources. The timeline points unmistakably one way. The Sumerian flood account precedes Genesis by over 1,000 years. The Atrahasis comes centuries earlier at least. The narrative flowed from Mesopotamia into Hebrew lore, probably via the Babylonian captivity in the 6th century BCE or prior exchanges. Yet let's move past debating origins and dig into what these documents truly say, as the specifics prove far more peculiar than usual retellings suggest. In the Atrahasis telling, the gods convene in a closed meeting to mandate the flood. Every deity swears an oath of silence regarding any alert to mortals. Enki, bound by that vow, devises a clever loophole fitting his ingenious nature. Instead of addressing Atrahasis outright, he calls out to the reed wall of his home. Quote 6. These directives include precise building specs. The craft emerges as a cubical form with matching sides, a rare blueprint that today's ship designers have even experimented with. In 2014, British Museum curator Irving Finkel released a rendering of a freshly discovered flood tablet, the famed Ark Tablet, that outlined even finer points for a round, rope-built hull, sealed with bitumen. Finkel's group constructed a miniature version following those guidelines, discovering it buoyant and remarkably stable on water, albeit without steering capability. This was an old-school lifeboat, not meant for navigation under sail. But the real focus here goes beyond the build instructions. Their actions amid the deluge itself are what truly capture our focus, as this is precisely where the conventional view of the flood, as a deliberate divine retribution, starts to crumble beneath the evidence embedded in the texts. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Tablet 11, the onset of the storm is depicted in words that ought to give any attentive reader pause. The Anunnaki lifted their flares, illuminating the earth with their glow. The gale intensified. The inundation surged forth. As the tempest descended, the deities grew horrified by the torrent. They withdrew, climbing to Anu's vaulted sky, the uppermost divine domain. And there, as the old writings relate, the gods huddled like whelps, pressed low beside the barrier's edge. They shed tears. Ishtar, deity of affection and conflict, shrieked in torment, mourning the ruin she had joined in ordaining. "Why did I command the ruin of my folk?" she lamented. "I brought my people into being, and now, akin to fish young, they teem in the waves." Take a moment to absorb the raw sentiment in these lines. We're talking about immortals who, by all accounts, orchestrated and sanctioned this deluge as an intentional penalty or renewal. Beings who reached a unified verdict in their heavenly assembly. Entities who might observe their verdict's fulfillment with some measure of approval or stoic reserve, as befits such a deed. Yet that's far from the scene painted here. Instead, we see divinities gripped by fear, scrambling to the loftiest refuge attainable, shrinking against barriers like skittish beasts, sobbing and howling, and evidently famished, since their mortal attendants no longer supplied the sustenance they relied on. The Atrahasis tale spells out this final detail plainly. Throughout the flood's 7 days, the gods received no tributes. They went without food. Those accustomed to regular nourishment from their crafted humans now faced emptiness. Such conduct doesn't fit arbiters carrying out a verdict. It suits entities ensnared in a disaster they hadn't wholly foreseen or mastered. An element of the flood surpassed even the gods' projections. It alarmed them enough to drive a retreat to the supreme heavenly sphere. This insight prompts a query the sources don't resolve outright, though the clues invite investigation. Suppose the deluge wasn't dispatched by the gods as retribution. Suppose it approached inevitably, propelled by earthly dynamics, maybe tied to those celestial occurrences we examined before, and the gods foresaw it. So their council's ruling wasn't, "We'll unleash a flood to chastise mortals," but rather, "A flood approaches. We need to pull back ahead of its arrival." This shift in perspective alters the entire tale. It recasts the flood story from one of godly reprisal to one of godly retreat. The assembly's edict turns from condemnation into a choice to abandon humankind rather than endanger the deity's security through any rescue bid. Enlil's demand that no one alert humans shifts from harshness to tactical caution. For the retreat to unfold without hitches, with the gods extracting themselves securely prior to the calamity, they couldn't afford chaotic crowds of people disrupting the process. Enki's alert to Atrahasis evolves from mild rebellion against sacred ruling to a frantic final effort at safeguarding. Like a researcher preserving a single specimen of the project right before the facility's demolition, the vessel transforms from an emblem of celestial compassion into an escape pod. A backup strategy crafted by the sole council member unwilling to witness his whole invention vanish. Now, allow your form to relax further. Permit your breath to settle into its natural flow while we delve into the tangible proofs that align with these timeless narratives. After all, the flood, be it seen as heavenly vengeance or raw disaster noted by early societies, has etched marks into the ground that researchers continue to chart ever more accurately. The younger Dryas impact theory stands as one of the most pivotal and contentious advances in contemporary geoscience. Introduced officially in 2007 by Richard Firestone and team in a study from the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, it suggests that around 12,800 years back, shards from a breaking comet hit or burst above various spots on our planet, igniting vast blazes spanning continents, undermining the Laurentide ice cap, unleashing a deluge of thawed water into the Atlantic Ocean that upended heat flows and sparked a swift plunge back into almost Ice Age chill, enduring about 1,200 years. Proponents of this theory point to a unique stratigraphic layer from around 10,800 BCE, rich in unusual levels of platinum, iridium, nanodiamonds, magnetic microspheres, and melt glass. These indicators, referred to as impact proxies, show up at the same time in more than 50 locations spanning North America, Europe, and the Middle East. Their uniform presence within one geological horizon aligns with an extraterrestrial strike or aerial explosion and proves challenging to attribute solely to earthly causes. Although the idea sparks debate, certain geologists propose alternative explanations for these proxies, while others challenge the timelines of some specimens. A detailed analysis in Earth Science Reviews from 2014, led by Whitkey along with numerous collaborators, bolstered the argument by identifying the layer at new locations and applying stricter chronometric techniques. An additional investigation in scientific reports from 2018, conducted by Woolbach and team, uncovered signs of widespread continental burning that matched the layer exactly, mirroring the kind of inferno expected from a celestial collision. Discussions persist, as they ought to in science, but the fundamental truth that a profound upheaval struck Earth about 12,800 years ago faces little challenge. The Younger Dryas cooling phase stands as a confirmed element of paleoclimatology. Its trigger, however, stays unresolved. This is precisely where ancient writings and contemporary research start to intersect in intriguing, if tentative, fashions. Mesopotamian flood stories portray not just swelling seas, but heavenly chaos. The deep's springs burst forth, heaven's portals flung wide. Both flames and floods feature in differing tales. In the Babylonian account, the Anunnaki hoist their torches to light the ruin, which certain interpreters see as evoking skyborne blazes, fiery fragments piercing the air, or the radiant arcs of distant strikes on the skyline. The deities retreating to the loftiest realms and huddling in dread fits better as a reaction to stellar assault than to a deluge they had ordered. Should the Younger Dryas impact, or a similar calamity, represent the true disaster embedded in these mythic flood tales, then Mesopotamia's gods weren't unleashing the waters. They were escaping them. Moreover, their forewarning of its arrival and capacity to withdraw ahead of the blow imply an astronomical sophistication beyond what we usually credit to early societies, yet one that Mesopotamian celestial logs clearly show they possessed. The link between the Younger Dryas episode and these flood legends has drawn examination from figures like Graham Hancock, whose ideas, though disputed and sidelined by orthodox archaeology, spotlight the temporal alignment of stratigraphic data with old literary records. Lately, experts in catastrophism, a discipline growing in credibility since the Chicxulub crater's revelation proved that space collisions mold worlds, have started considering that early human groups might have witnessed and chronicled astral disasters in their shared lore. Geologist Robert Schoch's claims, drawn from erosion features, that the Great Sphinx at Giza could date much earlier than the standard 2500 BCE, inject fresh layers into the debate, hinting at advanced pre-flood societies whose traces we are just starting to uncover. Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey emerges as a pivotal element in these talks, and justifiably so. Unearthed since 1995 under Klaus Schmidt of the German Archaeological Institute, who passed away, the location has been chronometrically placed via various reliable approaches to circa 9,600 BCE, some 7,000 years predating the Great Pyramid and 6,000 years before Stonehenge. It comprises vast round structures with T-form limestone monoliths, up to 20 tons each, several adorned with intricate carvings of beasts, symbolic motifs, and human-like forms. Building it demanded coordinated effort, advanced building know-how, stoneworking expertise, and creative prowess unforeseen by traditional archaeological timelines for that era. The builders of Göbekli Tepe were thought to be basic foragers, unequipped for grand edifices, yet its enigmas deepen with its fate. Circa 8000 BCE, the complex was intentionally interred. Massive quantities of soil and rubble were meticulously heaped atop the buildings, safeguarding them with astonishing precision for over 10,000 years to come. This wasn't simply desertion or ruin. It amounted to purposeful hiding. Klaus Schmidt, the lead archaeologist, typically explained it as a ritual shutdown, a formal conclusion to the site's ongoing role. Yet the sheer magnitude of the covering operation sparks deeper inquiries. What could drive a society, after pouring lifetimes of work into erecting such an elaborate setup, to expend equal energy concealing it? And from what or for whom? Were they shielding it or saving it? Among Göbekli Tepe's pillars, number 43, often dubbed the Vulture Stone, has drawn intense scrutiny from scholars seeking to unravel its symbolic meanings. A 2017 paper in the journal Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry, authored by Martin Sweatman and Dimitrios Tsikritsis from the University of Edinburgh, proposed that the pillar's animal engravings symbolize particular star patterns, with the arrangement mirroring the night sky around 10,950 BCE, near the start of the Younger Dryas period. Should this reading hold up, though it's still contested, the Vulture Stone could serve as a memorial emblem, an enduring stone inscription of the celestial disaster that ravaged the planet, housed in a complex that was intentionally interred afterward to safeguard the account for later eras capable of deciphering it. The notion that early societies purposefully inscribed vital information in lasting mediums to endure disasters and await later recovery isn't far-fetched at all. We engage in similar practices today. The 1977 launched Voyager Golden Records include encoded signals meant for alien societies that might encounter them eons hence. Meanwhile, the U.S. Department of Energy's Human Interference Task Force has devoted years to crafting alert signs for nuclear waste repositories, designed to stay comprehensible across 10,000 years, well past when today's tongues have morphed unrecognizably. If we feel compelled to transmit signals into the distant tomorrow, surely ancient groups wouldn't share that drive, especially fresh from enduring or heeding warnings about a calamity they hoped descendants could grasp and brace against. Allow your eyelids to droop if they feel the pull. Permit the links between old writings and current research to linger in your mind, needing no immediate answers. We're assembling an image from diverse threads, one richer than any lone hypothesis can encompass. The key point is that proof abounds in scripts, rock layers, and digs, and it converges from varied angles on roughly the same time frame and outcome. A world-shaking disaster struck Earth about 12,000 to 13,000 years back. Cultures worldwide embedded recollections of it in their core myths. And in one such culture, the Sumerians, they didn't blame vengeful deities in charge, but fleeing gods gripped by fear. To continue, we need to follow events once the floods ebbed, since the deluge marked no finale. It signaled a pivot, and the surviving documents that follow often unsettle more than the calamity proper. This is the tale of retreat, of vanishing presences, of deities who weathered the waters only to gradually pull away across ages and epochs from the realm they'd shaped, abandoning a human race altered at its core by the ordeal and left utterly isolated as never before. Mesopotamian accounts of the aftermath open on a scene brimming with raw emotional layers. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, As the seas subside and Utnapishtim peers from his boat's door onto the wrecked terrain, tears flow. The ground stretches flat like a rooftop. Every trace of humankind has become mud. He offers a ritual atop the peak where his craft grounded. The gods, famished after 7 days bereft of mortal tributes, flock to the aroma. The epic employs a striking comparison. The deities caught the fragrance. They swarmed to the sacrifice like insects to bait. Like flies, indeed. These are entities who dominated the planet, who fashioned people, who wielded nature's powers. Yet here they cluster near a simple roast with the frantic hunger of bugs chasing scraps. The portrayal is strikingly poignant and insightful at once. The gods relied on people, not just for toil or reverence, but for their very nourishment, the steady rituals from the sacred complexes. The deluge had severed that lifeline in disaster, and the divine had paid dearly. Enlil shows up latest, enraged that survivors remained. He'd intended complete extinction. Upon realizing that Enki had tipped off Napishtim, the tension between the sibling deities erupts into a peak moment, vividly etched in the ancient narrative. Enki justifies his choice by insisting that eradicating every person was far too harsh, emphasizing how the faultless shouldn't share the fate of the corrupt, and proposing that wild animals, starvation, or epidemics could have acted as more restrained options compared to an all-encompassing flood. This exchange hides a deeper layer that listeners from antiquity would have grasped intuitively. Enki isn't simply advocating for one person's escape. He's upholding the full project of human genesis, contending that countless ages of labor can't be abandoned over imperfections solvable by gentler fixes. This settlement proves vital for interpreting what comes next. The Divine Council awards Utnapishtim and his partner everlasting life, banishing them to Dilmun, a remote Eden that a few researchers connect to Bahrain amid the Persian Gulf. It's less a prize than containment. The only pair to persist via heavenly aid gets cut off from fellow humans, kept inaccessible, granted undying existence to avert death, but barred from childbearing or disseminating any trace of celestial preference they hold. The remnant population, those who clawed their way to shelter unaided, must repopulate San's immediate godly direction. The framework has altered, a fact that flood aftermath accounts reveal with unflinching detail. The steady pullback of godly involvement in mortal concerns. The Sumerian king roster logs this evolution with its hallmark official detail. With the waters receded, as sovereignty descended from above, it took root in Kish. The wording "9" carries weight. Though governance's roots stayed sacred, delivery now happened remotely, passed along instead of overseen up close. No longer did the gods claim the seats of power in person. They began designating mortal stand-ins, agents, sacred monarchs, who drew on holy legitimacy, yet wielded it absent gods looming tangibly at their backs. Rule spans in the king list's flood successor entries weave their tale of scaling back. Early rulers beyond the deluge commanded vast timelines still. Tradition credits Kish's founding sovereign with 1,200 years of dominion. Still, figures taper off reliably across ensuing lineages, settling into credible historical scales. View these dropping counts as factual accounts of curtailed existences, as the creeping loss of sacred shielding that once propped up outsized vitality, or as an artistic motif mirroring ebbing otherworldly sway. The direction stands out. A force was ebbing away. The prop for the remarkable was lifting, yielding a reality ever more routine, hemmed in, and unmistakably mortal. Dig findings from the era whisper comparable clues, if parsed with caution. Mesopotamia's early settlements kept thriving and advancing across the eras after the catastrophe echoed in deluge stories. Eridu, Uruk, Lagash, Nippur. Each spot displays steady settlement from the 4th through 3rd millennia BCE. Yet sacred edifices in these times shift form, a pattern the digs chart with exactitude. The initial shrines at Eridu, from profound dig layers probed by Fuad Safar and Seton Lloyd during the 1940s, feature compact, unadorned forms on a scheme that holds steady across repeated renewals. Fresh iterations piled right over old wreckage, mirroring the foundational pattern, like echoing a hallowed design. The lineup covers 17 stacked layers over some 3,000 years. However, moving up the timeline, these buildings expand, gain intricacy, and shift toward dazzling earthly adherence over accommodating a tangible divine occupant. The ziggurat, that signature terraced spire defining Mesopotamian design, embodies this progression's apex. The ziggurat at now somewhat rebuilt and observable today in southern Iraq, climbs 3 levels to a former stature past 70 feet. Erected in Ur's 3rd dynasty circa 2100 BCE under King Ur-Nammu, its structural import lies here. It wasn't meant for habitation. The tiny chapel crowning it, scaled by a vast ramp, stood as an emblematic bridge skyward and downward. No living space, crafted for sporadic calls, for flashes of divine revelation, for those sparse instances of godly manifestation. Contrast the ziggurat's summit temple with those early shrines in Eridu, outfitted with altars for offerings, fixed setups for meals and libations, recessed spots for god statues that got regular tending, and all the setups implying a constant divine occupant. This shift in building design from home to rendezvous spot mirrors the retreat outlined in the ancient writings. Deities moved from dwelling alongside humans to dropping in now and then, and eventually to staying away entirely. Records of temple holdings from that era warrant much greater notice from the wider world than they usually get. Priests in Mesopotamia documented temple interiors with scrupulous detail, cataloging each holy item, ceremonial tool, and godly furnishing in the exacting style typical of their administrative system. When digs uncover these sacred complexes, the structures emerge, but the listed possessions do not. Sometimes, plunder accounts for the absence. Raiders over the ages have plundered shrines of treasures, but elsewhere the story differs. Entries note items carried off to the heavens or reclaimed by the deity, wording that points to the owner spirits taking back their property, not bandits stealing it. And traces in some temples back this up. Bare bases that formerly supported god figures, still showing oil residue from rituals on the stone. Wall alcoves for offerings, flawlessly intact yet vacant. Ceremonial containers missing from their recorded spots. The buildings stand whole, the contents vanished. This doesn't look like the work of attackers. It resembles a deliberate pullout, like someone gathering key possessions and exiting methodically, abandoning the framework. Mesopotamian dirges, a literary form that thrived near 2000 BCE, offer the rawest proof of this exit. These extended works, frequently of remarkable poetic skill, recount the downfall of major urban centers and the exit of their guardian deities. The dirge for for Sumer, and for Nippur, for Eridu, each shares a common outline. The city's patron deity or goddess revokes safeguarding. Disaster strikes. The settlement crumbles. Inhabitants flee. The writer captures the heartbreak of a society realizing their woes stem not just from battles or calamities, but from heavenly desertion. The Lament, among the finest surviving and most analyzed, portrays the goddess Ningal in tears over her doomed home as she readies to abandon it. Experts like Samuel Noah Kramer and Thorkild Jacobsen have rendered it into modern tongues, its poignant force bridging ages. Ningal begs the heavenly assembly to save her domain. They deny her. The verdict stands. She has to go. As she departs, gazing upon the wreckage, the bard renders her sorrow with stark clarity. Quote 10. She grieves. Quote 11. The order is crucial. The deity leaves before the havoc. The retreat isn't a reaction to the fall, it's the trigger. The place collapses because its shield is gone. Not vice versa. We can piece together the real history fueling these dirges from other records. The third dynasty of crumbled circa 2004 BCE, battered by Elamite assaults from the east and Amorite raids from the west. Ur's collapse was a true calamity, echoed in the dirges, yet they go beyond recounting warfare. They evoke a deeper change, a divine fading that outlasts mere politics or clashes. The gods didn't exit due to Ur's demise. Fell because the gods exited. Scholars often see this as faith-based framing rather than strict history, a trope poets employ to make sense of collapse. That's the standard view, likely spot on for many instances. Still, the uniform motif in dirges for diverse cities, the stress on godly retreat coming ahead of ruin, the temple ledgers indicating systematic clearance of holy goods, all this implies the dirge custom holds on to more than poetic device. It holds echoes of a real, drawn-out retreat spanning ages, felt by temple keepers as a true severance from the divine. Now, let your thoughts wander through the ensuing eras, for the leaving wasn't one abrupt moment, but a gradual dimming, a lingering fade-out over time rather than a sharp vanishing. The manner in which people adjusted to this gradual dimming profoundly influenced the evolution of faith. After those primary elegies were crafted, Mesopotamia's spiritual framework endured, yet it underwent a fundamental shift. Ceremonies evolved into more intricate affairs, prioritizing flawless execution over authentic divine interaction. Clerical hierarchies expanded and specialized further, establishing elaborate administrative structures to oversee sanctuaries where the gods' tangible presence had faded from view. Divination practices, once channels for unambiguous godly messages, grew vague and inconsistent, necessitating ever more sophisticated analytical tools to interpret omens and visions that became increasingly obscure. Surviving cuneiform records from the later Babylonian and Assyrian eras candidly capture the priest's exasperation and bewilderment. Why remains the deity unresponsive? Why do the signs clash in contradiction? Why do the ritual protocols no longer yield their intended effects? Far from abstract theorizing, these reflect the tangible frustrations of skilled practitioners whose methods had ceased to function, directives executed with precision, yet the anticipated results simply failed to appear. Envision a technician adhering scrupulously to a circuit blueprint after the main power has been severed, every link intact, every element properly positioned, but no spark of life emerges. This captures the essence of Mesopotamian worship in the wake after the gods' withdrawal, a meticulously preserved apparatus tethered to oblivion. The esoteric cults that arose across the Mediterranean basin during the first millennium BCE might embody a counter to this profound quiet. Consider the Eleusinian rites of Greece, the Isis devotion in Egypt, the legendary cycles carried by Roman troops, or the mystical circles of Orphism and Pythagoras. All professed entry to concealed wisdom, arcane doctrines safeguarded from bygone times, and pathways to unfiltered communion with the divine that official faiths could no longer provide. Their ritual initiations stress on stepwise disclosure of esoteric realities to the tested faithful, and rigid veiling of core secrets all align with the targeted transmission of pre-departure insights along exclusive lines. The Greek chronicler Herodotus, authoring in the 5th century BCE, asserted that the Eleusinian ceremonies sprang from Egyptian origins. Fellow classical authors connected sundry mystery paths to deeper antiquity: Phoenicia, Babylon, the fabled pre-flood realm. Debate lingers on whether such lineages hold historical truth or served as later bids for revered antiquity. Still, the pattern endures: clandestine orders surfacing to safeguard lore that dominant religious bodies had forfeited, echoing the narrative etched in Mesopotamian inscriptions. A profound understanding once flourished, it slipped away. Isolated collectives labored to retain shards of the legacy. Shift your gaze now to the heavens, for the stellar thread in the Anunnaki saga may well be the most solidly substantiated facet of the whole legacy. Regardless of your stance on Sumerian chronicles, the celestial expertise they encode proves tangible, quantifiable, and often strikingly precise. Nestled amid this wealth of star lore lie irregularities that scholars have yet to fully unravel. Building on Sumerian foundations, the Babylonians forged what may have been antiquity's pinnacle in skywatching. Their archives encompass seamless spans of centuries. They charted the orbits of the 5 planets visible to the unaided eye with fidelity that today's experts can cross-check via historical projections. They formulated predictive algorithms for solar and lunar eclipses, attaining precision down to mere hours. Their inventories of stars and star groups, exhaustive in scope, underpin the celestial framework we employ even now. The dozen zodiacal houses, the 360-degree circle, the 60-minute hour subdivided into 60 seconds, all stem straight from Babylonian sexagesimal arithmetic, which in turn drew from Sumerian numerical roots. The MUL.APIN tablets, a vast repository of sky data assembled around the 7th century BCE from far earlier materials, stand as the richest preserved digest of Mesopotamian astral wisdom. The title signifies the plow star, alluding to the stellar pattern known today as triangulum, or segments of Andromeda. These records enumerate more than 60 stars and configurations, document the first appearances at dawn of pivotal luminaries, map the moon's and planets' journeys across the zodiacal pathway, and furnish computational rules for anticipating cosmic phenomena. Creating a record like this demands a high degree of organized scrutiny, pointing to hundreds of years of preliminary efforts, with successive groups of stargazers meticulously documenting and improving their findings through a level of rigor that reflects an extraordinary level of organized dedication. This naturally prompts a long-standing debate among experts, ongoing for more than 100 years, about whether the people of Mesopotamia built this expertise entirely on their own, via steady careful watching of the skies, or if they drew upon some basic astronomical insights passed down from a predecessor culture. The typical scholarly view favors self-reliant progress, and there's no reason from a scientific standpoint to doubt its feasibility. People have shown time and again their potential for remarkable feats of skywatching when properly driven and structured. Examples from the star-tracking annals of the Islamic Golden Age, ancient Chinese scholars, and the Maya highlight how advanced celestial wisdom can emerge from one society's efforts alone, provided enough time and impetus. Yet, some puzzling features in the Mesopotamian archives invite second thoughts. It seems the Sumerians recognized the Earth's round shape during an era when that idea was thought to be rare or unknown. They crafted a depiction of the solar system that, in certain readings, accurately placed the sun as the hub of planetary paths, long before Copernicus proposed it, thousands of years later. Their calculations in astral math incorporated equations that presuppose an understanding of precession, the gradual tilt of the planet's rotational axis, which shifts the spring equinox across zodiac signs over roughly 25,920 years. Credit for uncovering precession usually goes to the Greek scholar Hipparchus, circa 127 BCE. However, hints of recognition for these precessional shifts show up in older Mesopotamian writings. Moreover, figures like Giorgio de Santillana and Herta von Dechend, in their groundbreaking 1969 book Hamlet's Mill, contended that awareness of precession was woven into global myths, hinting at a shared origin predating recorded history by a vast margin. The Sumerian term Nibiru calls for precise handling, as it stands out as one of the most misconstrued and distorted concepts in all of fringe historical speculation. Within Babylonian sky lore, Nibiru is an authentic word found in authentic cuneiform writings. The Enuma Elish, that Babylonian origin tale, employs it when describing the formation of universal harmony. The MUL.APIN tablets reference Nibiru amid stellar discussions. Etymologically, it suggests a quote 13 or quote 14. In conventional Assyriological views, it denotes a heavenly benchmark, perhaps Jupiter crossing the meridian line, or maybe a stationary sky position serving as a navigation aid for observers. This represents the accepted expert consensus, as championed by Assyriologists such as Wayne Horowitz, whose 1998-volume Mesopotamian Cosmic Geography continues to serve as the definitive scholarly resource. Zecharia Sitchin's take on Nibiru as a particular rogue world tracing a 3,600-year elongated path gets dismissed by both Assyriology and mainstream space science. Specialists like Michael Heiser, who earned a doctorate in Hebrew Bible and Semitic tongues from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and has issued thorough critiques of Sitchin's linguistic claims, have dismantled those interpretations. On the cosmic side, critics note that no matching body has turned up, even with ever more exhaustive scans of distant solar realms. That said, and this marks a truly intriguing advancement in research, the idea of a massive hidden world lurking in the solar system's fringes gained surprising backing in 2016. That's when Konstantin Bedigan and Mike Brown from Caltech released an article in the Astronomical Journal offering computational proof of a hefty invisible world's pull, inferred from the unusual grouping of orbits among objects past Neptune. Dubbed Planet 9 by researchers, this posited entity might weigh 5 to 10 times Earth's, with a loop lasting 10,000 to 20,000 years. It doesn't align with Sitchin's Nibiru vision. The suggested path and traits vary greatly. Still, credible data pointing to a big unseen planet out there lends an intriguing twist to the conversation, implying that ancient fascination with far-off wanderers beyond visible ones might hold a kernel of truth, regardless of flawed specifics. The Enuma Elish proper, that Babylonian Genesis story unearthed in Ashurbanipal's library and first brought to light by George Smith in 1876, warrants deeper examination given its intricate worldview that's routinely underrated in depth. Scholars, building on the insights of Thorkild Jacobson and similar experts, typically view the Enuma Elish as a theological and political manifesto aimed at elevating the Babylonian deity Marduk above the ancient Sumerian gods. There's little doubt this served a key purpose. Recited each year at the Babylonian New Year celebration, the epic's role in bolstering political power is clear, yet its cosmological elements go far beyond such motives. Stripping away the mythic figures reveals a progression of cosmic origins that strikingly mirrors contemporary scientific theories. It begins with a chaotic, undifferentiated mass, followed by the division of basic primordial substances, the buildup of heavenly objects via processes akin to impacts and accumulation, the setting of orbital trajectories, and the origin of seasonal cycles through the tilt of a central axis. Though cloaked in tales of gods, the order of events feels deliberate rather than random. Some analysts interpret Marduk's battle with the chaos goddess Tiamat, where he cleaves her apart to form the sky from one portion and the earth from the other, redistributes her watery essence, and stations her monstrous brood as luminaries in the heavens. As a poetic encoding of how planets emerge, Tiamat embodies a massive early celestial entity, torn asunder with its parts reshaping the world above and below, its fluids scattered and its spawn placed in starry rolls. This could stem from distorted recollections of sophisticated astronomical insights passed down from an earlier, more enlightened origin, or it might just show how Mesopotamians wove stories to grapple with the universe's mysteries. At the very least, these alignments with current planetary theories intrigue. At best, they hint at profound connections. Mesopotamian star charts include odd entries that defy easy classification under routine skywatching. Amid predictable notes on planetary motions and foretold eclipses lie mentions of puzzling sights that the ancient writers noted with precision, yet struggled to fit into their established systems, bodies tracing paths unlike any familiar wanderers. Gleams emerging in forbidden sky zones. Events followed with apparent haste, unlike the steady, methodical approach usual in their records of the heavens. While experts often attribute these quirks to comets, novae, or odd weather effects, all straightforward natural causes, the charged tone in select passages evokes alarm more than detached logging. Links between such sky oddities and the gods' arrivals or exits imply that certain logs captured sightings tied to broader stories of divine comings and goings. Now take a slow, deep breath. Feel your lungs fill and empty in sync with the timeless cadence of breath that binds you to all who ever gazed at these identical constellations. For we're on the verge of circling the world to follow the tale of godly exodus through societies said to have never crossed paths. The recurring motifs we'll uncover may soothe or disturb you based on your stance toward vast-scale serendipity. The cross-cultural study of God's leavings stands as one of humanity's most striking yet overlooked threads in lore. We've delved deeply into the Mesopotamian version already. Deities arrived. They shaped or refined humankind. They became disillusioned with their handiwork. Disaster struck. The gods withdrew. Mortals remained, clutching scraps of sacred wisdom and a vow of future reunion. Observe now how faithfully this blueprint echoes in realms divided by seas, ranges, wastes, and ages of isolated evolution. Egypt offers the nearest echo to Mesopotamia's saga, logical given their neighboring lands and documented interplay of traditions. The notion of Zep Tepi, or the first time, evokes a golden epoch of direct godly governance over the land. The Palermo stone among Egypt's most ancient chronicles from around 2400 BCE chronicles the rule of divinities and half-gods predating mortal kings. Likewise, the Turin Royal Canon, a scroll from Ramses II's era, catalogues godly sovereigns who came before pharaohs, their tenures spanning millennia. Egypt's pyramid texts, the earliest sacred writings etched into Old Kingdom tombs starting circa 2400 BCE, allude to that primordial godly epic and depict the dead ruler's rise to the divine spheres, flipping the script on the god's initial plunge to earth. The story of Ra's retreat proves especially revealing. Ra, the exalted sun god, once held sway right here on the ground until mortals schemed against him. The account titled The Destruction of Mankind, inscribed on the walls of Seti I's tomb and other New Kingdom burial sites, recounts how Ra dispatched the goddess Hathor in her ferocious form as Sekhmet to exact vengeance on defiant humans. The carnage was devastating, yet Ra soon showed mercy, flooding the lands with beer tinted red to mimic blood, which diverted Sekhmet from her fury and preserved a portion of humankind. Rather than fully abandoning Earth, Ra ascended to the heavens aboard the sky cow Nut, with the other deities trailing behind. Thus concluded the era of gods ruling directly. It gave way to the time of mortal pharaohs who boasted godly ancestry, yet lacked true divinity. The resemblance to the Mesopotamian story runs deeper than surface level. It's fundamentally similar in structure. Both feature a chief god growing weary of people. Both involve an effort at partial annihilation. Both see that effort cut short. Both lead to the deities stepping back from everyday human matters. Both usher in an interim phase where godly power passes to mortal representatives. Naturally, the particulars vary, as distinct societies draw from a shared heritage. Still, the progression of occurrences aligns strikingly. Indian lore yields yet another compelling analogy, brimming with depth. Vedic texts, penned from about 1500 to 500 BCE, yet echoing much ancient oral lore, speak of the Devas, the radiant beings who once mingled freely with mortals in bygone eras. The Mahabharata, shaped across centuries and finalized around the 4th century CE, narrates an epic clash that closed out a whole epoch, a battle deploying awe-inspiring divine armaments and aerial craft known as Vimanas that ferried both fighters and immortals through the air. Some passages depicting weapons in the Mahabharata evoke nuclear blasts, though such views remain conjectural and lack backing from conventional Indology experts. Far more grounded is the overarching tale. The period of gods engaging openly in mortal lives drew to a close. Krishna, the incarnate divine who had roamed among people, left the world behind. The Bhagavata Purana details his ascent. And upon his exit, the Kali Yuga commenced, the present era of shadow and decline, where the link between mortals and the divine has faded almost to nothing. Hindu lore dates Kali Yuga's onset to 3102 BCE, a figure derived by ancient Indian stargazers from celestial alignments. This timing slots neatly into the time frame when Sumerian society was solidifying its tales of godly arrival and exit. Scholars of comparative faith, such as Mirsha Eliade, have highlighted this overlap in his studies of sacred time across civilizations, be it a collective recall of real happenings, a mutual celestial framework, or mere chance. Greek myths deliver the clearest outline of gods gradually pulling away via the, quote, 17 idea, elaborated by Hesiod in his Works and Days from around 700 BCE. Hesiod outlines 5 successive eras, each worsening: the Golden Age under Cronus, with humans dwelling alongside gods in ease and joy; the Silver Age, as virtue waned and divine nearness dimmed; the Bronze Age, rife with strife; the Heroic Age, era of the Trojan conflict and mythic champions, where immortals still meddled in human destinies, but from growing remoteness; and at last, the Iron Age, Hesiod's day and our own, when deities retreated to far-off Olympus, rendering their earthly meddling sporadic and unreliable. The Delphic Oracle, Greece's premier conduit for godly words, marks a tangible end to such exchanges. The Pythia, Apollo's entranced priestesses, issued prophecies from the 8th century BCE right up to the late 4th century CE, covering more than a millennium. Over time, though, the oracles grew sparser and less potent. Plutarch, a Roman-era author and Delphi priest in the late 1st and early 2nd centuries CE, penned a full dialogue on the oracle's failure, probing the reasons for their hush. His figures ponder causes like the flight of inspiring spirits from holy grounds, the depletion of the numinous vapors thought to fuel the Pythia, or the broader waning of divine interest in worldly doings. The final prophecy given to Emperor Julian's messengers in about 362 CE was said to mourn the cessation of godly messages. As the legends put it, the stream of oracular words had dried up entirely. The deity no longer spoke. The link between heaven and earth had been severed. Now, shift your gaze westward over the Atlantic to the Americas, where you'll encounter striking similarities that undermine the idea that ancient myths in the Old World and New World evolved entirely separately. For the story of divine withdrawal shows up in American traditions with such precise details and shared patterns that it calls for some kind of accounting, no matter which theory you prefer. In South America's Inca society, the legacy of Viracocha endures, a founding god whose title, roughly meaning sea foam or lake grease in Quechua, was captured by 16th century Spanish recorders like Pedro Chiesa de Leon, Juan de Betanzos, and Cristobal de Molina. These writers compiled strikingly uniform tales of the entity. Viracocha is portrayed as rising from Lake Titicaca in an era beyond recorded history. Portrayed as a culture bearer, he mingled with primitive communities, instructing them in farming, building, stargazing, and the societal frameworks essential for advanced societies. The preserved physical portrayals depict him as a towering presence, frequently light-skinned and with a beard, traits rare among native Andean folk, which the chroniclers highlighted due to their stark contrast with typical local features. Once his mission of enlightenment was done, Viracocha left. Reliable reports from diverse accounts show him striding over the Pacific's waves, moving toward the western horizon at sunset, with a vow to come back whenever his followers required aid. His parting directive urged them to uphold his lessons and safeguard the structure he had instilled. The Bolivian ruins of Tiwanaku, close to Lake Titicaca's edge, are long linked to Viracocha and boast grand stonework that certain experts trace to eras well before the Incas rose to power. At Tiwanaku's Sungate, intricate reliefs dominate, with a prominent central image that a few academics see as Viracocha himself, flanked by surrounding motifs possibly symbolizing celestial patterns or celestial companions. When Francisco Pizarro and his Spanish troops landed in Peru in 1532, the moment echoed tragically with Viracocha's foretelling. These fair-complexioned, bearded outsiders from the ocean fit the promised god's profile so neatly that portions of the Inca elite reportedly paused in their reaction. Records show this doubt was brief and incomplete, as the Incas soon identified the Spaniards as aggressors, not saviors. Yet the foretelling's role and its sway over the Incas' early dealings are attested in various unbiased Spanish writings, along with later native accounts, such as Felipe Guaman Poma de Ayala's early 17th century chronicle, which offers indigenous views on the invasion. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, offers a parallel of equal intrigue, worshipped from at least the Olmec era in the 2nd millennium BCE, and manifesting in nearly every key culture there, from Teotihuacan and the Toltecs to the Mixtecs and Aztecs. The Maya called him Kukulkan, honoring him with the massive pyramid at Chichen Itza in the Yucatan, built so that equinox shadows craft the sight of a snake slithering down the steps, symbolizing godly arrival followed by retreat. Quetzalcoatl's exit tale blends legend and potential real events. Mythically, he was a world maker and civilizer. Historically, perhaps, Topiltzin Quetzalcoatl, a high priest king of the Toltec hub Tula, reigning circa the 10th century CE, lends credence through digs at the location. Both versions' farewell arcs point to a shared plotline. Quetzalcoatl voyages eastward over the Gulf of Mexico on a snake-formed raft, pledging a calendar-specific comeback. Hernán Cortés' touchdown on Mexico's shore in 1519 aligned with one such predicted year in Aztec reckonings, leaving Emperor Moctezuma wrestling with whether the omen was at hand. Historian Hugh Thomas, in his detailed 1993 analysis of the conquest, examined the intricate and conflicting accounts of Montezuma's reactions. He determined that although linking Cortés to Quetzalcoatl undoubtedly played a role in the Aztec ruler's considerations, the situation wasn't merely a straightforward error of recognizing a deity, as many popular stories claim. However, no one questions the pre-existence of the story about departure and return, which came long before any European contact. Records in pre-Columbian codices capture it. Engravings on pre-Columbian stoneworks depict it. Independent chroniclers noted it in oral histories. Moreover, its core framework strikingly mirrors the departure tales from Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, and India, parallels too evident to dismiss. Further north in Mexico, the Hopi of the American Southwest maintained stories with the closest resemblances to those Mesopotamian records. These were first captured by anthropologists during the late 1800s and early 1900s by figures like Alexander Stephen and Jesse Walter Fuchs, well prior to the broad dissemination or deciphering of Sumerian writings. The Hopi recount cycles of world eras, each concluding in disaster, a pattern echoing the Mesoamerican idea of successive suns and the Hindu notion of repeating yugas. They describe the Kachina spirits, mighty entities who dwelled with humans in the past, instructing and leading them firsthand. Eventually, the Kachinas withdrew to their abodes in the San Francisco peaks and various holy mountains. They don't roam among people anymore as before. Instead, they're summoned via intricate ritual dances, where masked dancers channel the Kachina essences, briefly reviving the absent godly presence. The Hopi also retain the lore of the ant people, creatures who hid humans in underground havens amid earlier global calamities, leading them through hidden depths until the surface grew safe again. This motif of subterranean shelter amid universal disasters recurs in numerous Native American cultures and subtly recalls the Mesopotamian Abzu, the underground domain tied to Enki, the deity who preserved humankind from the deluge. Take a deep breath now and allow the weight of this recurring theme to sink in. We've followed this fundamental storyline through 6 continents and no fewer than a dozen separate cultural lineages. Divine or potent entities arrived on Earth. They imparted to humans the skills of advanced society. Something in humanity's progress disturbed them. Disaster struck. They left, often vowing a future comeback. Particulars differ from one account to another. Titles shift, settings vary culturally, yet the underlying story endures with a uniformity that calls for scrutiny. The prevailing scholarly view in anthropology attributes this to innate aspects of human minds. Every society crafts legends of an idyllic past when existence felt richer and the mystical felt nearer. Societies channel fears of fading significance and direction into tales of gods pulling away. The god's exit symbolizes the fading magic that shadows the rise of intricate societies, the shift from a reality brimming with holy significance to one dominated by worldly logic. This idea holds real strength. Minds do spawn repeated motifs in myths. Joseph Campbell's 1949 book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, illustrates how the monomyth, a shared storyline, emerges worldwide because it taps into common human trials and thought processes. Still, the psychological take falls short in one key way that's seldom addressed. It accounts for why societies might invent such exit stories. It fails to clarify why those stories align on precise elements like unions between gods and mortals, the deluge that triggered or followed the leaving, the celestial expertise tied to the exiting divinities, the pledge of reappearance tied to repeating heavenly cycles. These aren't broad traits of the psyche. They're targeted assertions about concrete happenings, and their overlap in unrelated societies challenges a purely mental origin. The diffusionist view, positing that these alike tales originated from one point and traveled via interactions, better handles those fine points, but encounters its hurdles. Proven paths of trade and sharing could reasonably trace the movement of mythic elements through the ancient Near East and Mediterranean regions. Mesopotamian writings clearly shaped the Hebrew scriptures. Greek myths bear signs of Near Eastern impact. Challenges emerge when attempting to bridge such mythological blending across the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Although accumulating data points to prehistoric maritime interactions, like Thor Heyerdahl's renowned Kiki voyage in 1947 and contemporary genetic studies hinting at modest pre-Columbian links between Pacific Islanders and South Americans, the proof falls short of accounting for the striking parallels in myths we encounter. This opens the door to a third option, the one repeatedly claimed in the ancient accounts, yet dismissed by conventional academia as unworthy of debate. These stories align because they recount a shared reality. Extraordinary entities operated throughout the ancient world, instructing, directing, and engaging with various human societies in diverse areas. They withdrew from these groups within a roughly concurrent period, and the ensuing legends, though warped and expanded through generations of spoken lore, retain a kernel of collective historical recollection. We can't confirm this hypothesis with the data at hand, nor can we rule it out entirely. True scholarly integrity guided by the facts means embracing all three theories at once, letting each shed light on various facets of the phenomenon, while resisting the urge to settle the issue too soon. Allow your form to sink deeper now. Permit the celestial bodies, so meticulously observed by our forebears with unwavering zeal, to rotate languidly above in the darkness of your fluttering eyelids. We're nearing the concluding phases of this extended inquiry, phases that call for reflection rather than resolution, for openness to enduring mysteries instead of pat solutions, enigmas that have lingered through 5,000 years of documented human wisdom, and probably much earlier in the shadowy realms of unwritten tales. If the Anunnaki truly existed and truly departed, the reasons for their exit can be examined via multiple analytical perspectives, each bolstered by distinct textual clues. One viewpoint is environmental. Should the Younger Dryas impact theory hold true, it offers a precise trigger for the disasters outlined in flood epics. Comet shards slamming into the planet, igniting vast blazes, toppling glacial formations, inundating shorelines, and upending weather systems for more than 1,000 years. With their superior celestial expertise, the Anunnaki could have foreseen this calamity far enough in advance to orchestrate a retreat. The frenzy depicted in the sources makes sense if the impending doom proved grander, nearer, or more erratic than their forecasts suggested. Superior foresight doesn't always mean averting interstellar disasters, merely foreseeing and possibly dodging them. They fled because they grasped the threat's scale and realized it was unstoppable. Another perspective is genetic. The engineering of humankind had veered off course beyond planned limits. People were breeding more rapidly than anticipated. Unions between gods and mortals were yielding offspring with unpredictable traits. The intentional constraints embedded in humanity's design were being undermined by this godly mortal hybridization. From the standpoint of a maker intent on overseeing their invention, this signaled a breakdown in oversight. In this interpretation, the deluge wasn't just a random calamity, but a deliberate intervention, a moment to reboot the project, purge the mixed lineages, and cull populations to sustainable sizes. Their exit came afterward, as the overhaul fell short of perfection. The survivor, be it Noah, Utnapishtim, Ziusudra, or another moniker, passed on the very heritage the waters aimed to wipe out. Seeing that their handiwork had escaped internal governance, the Anunnaki opted for tactical disengagement, relying on the passage of time and humanity's abbreviated lifespans to achieve what the inundation couldn't. A further angle is administrative. Earth served as a remote station in a grander enterprise. The Anunnaki were stationed here for defined objectives: harvesting materials, conducting life-form trials, monitoring developments. Once those goals were met, or circumstances evolved, resources depleted, trials wrapped up, or galactic dynamics altered, directives from superior command mandated pullout. From a universal scale, the withdrawal was standard procedure, despite its devastating impact on humanity. It resembled imperial officials vacating a far-flung territory, or laborers finishing a gig and heading back to base. The urgency in the accounts might stem not from earthly perils, but from a tight evacuation schedule, a brief safe passage slot that couldn't be delayed. Yet another framework is factional discord. The records brim with godly feuds, clashing alliances, and contested rulings among the Anunnaki. Enlil and Enki clashed time and again over core policies regarding humankind. The Great Flood itself stemmed from a divisive ruling, approved by the prevailing group, yet sabotaged by dissenters. Imagine if the gods' exit wasn't a collective retreat, but the fallout from an internal divine conflict. Suppose one group expelled another. Or perhaps it marked banishment for some and triumph for the rest. Those mourning poems about the exit of certain city guardians, while other godly figures may have lingered or come back, hint at a splintered leave-taking instead of a single orderly one. Every such perspective sheds light on varied elements of the records, yet none captures the full picture. The straightforward assessment, one that honors the data alongside our interpretive boundaries, is that we lack definitive answers, and maybe always will, about the Anunnaki's reasons for leaving, assuming they were real as portrayed in the writings. Still, the written traces of their going are plentiful, steady through diverse texts and societies, bolstered by digs that resist simpler interpretations, and tied intriguingly to geologic and celestial signs of disasters from those eras. With that in mind, let's turn to the legacy they abandoned. Beyond the crumbled structures, inscribed clay slabs, and forsaken shrine bases, it was the wisdom itself, the legacy that people nurtured onward from any encounters these tales evoke. After all, should the Anunnaki's withdrawal have truly occurred, its lasting impact lay not in the gods' void, but in the gifts they bestowed, and the arduous, uneven journey of safeguarding, eroding, forgetting, and sometimes reclaiming that heritage. Sumer's gifts to civilization stand as proven history, etched in countless varied cuneiform tablets and validated by more than 100 years of meticulous excavation and linguistic study. The Sumerians created or refined the world's earliest writing system, cuneiform, which started as basic pictographs for bookkeeping circa 3400 BCE and matured across generations into a versatile medium for capturing stories, rules, knowledge, and beliefs. Among the first literary masterpieces in history, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Enuma Elish, and assorted Sumerian songs and dirges, arose in this script, launching writing ranks as a pivotal human milestone, and it all began in Sumer. In mathematics, too, the Sumerians reached heights that deserve more recognition. Their base 60 sexagesimal approach isn't just an old quirk. It's a highly useful setup that simplifies divisions by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, or 30, outshining the decimal base for numerous calculations. Drawing on it, they crafted charts for multiplying, dividing, square roots, and even cube roots. They tackled quadratic problems, figured out areas for odd-shaped figures, and grasped the idea, now called the Pythagorean theorem, over a millennium ahead of Pythagoras. An artifact called Plimpton 322, housed at Columbia University, and from around 1800 BCE lists Pythagorean triples, showcasing deep insights into numbers. Scholar Eleanor Robson has persuasively shown that this piece points to an educational lineage, implying a rich backdrop of math progress. Sumer's legal innovations carried similar weight and reach. The Code of Ur-Nammu, from about 2100 BCE, endures as humanity's oldest known law collection, edging out the renowned Code of Hammurabi by some 300 years. Its rules expose a culture with nuanced ideas of fairness, like scaled penalties, fines for physical harm, and safeguards for the weak, such as widows and orphans. This juridical stream, kicking off with Ur-Nammu and flowing into Hammurabi's work and beyond, laid the groundwork for Near Eastern jurisprudence, which shaped Mosaic codes, then Roman statutes, and ultimately today's Western legal frameworks. As you face a judge in a contemporary court, the framework of equity encircling you traces straight back to those initial Sumerian judgments. Mesopotamian medicine advanced likewise and left a deep mark. One of the oldest surviving medical documents, a Sumerian tablet from Nippur around 2100 BCE, outlines 15 remedies using ingredients from plants, animals, and minerals, which were processed via methods like boiling, straining, and direct skin application. Subsequent Babylonian writings detail advanced surgeries, ways to diagnose illnesses, and complex drug formulations. The comprehensive guide assembled by the healer Esagilkin Apli from Borsippa in the 11th century BCE serves as an organized medical manual, grouping ailments based on signs and impacted bodily organs, a level of classification that Western medicine wouldn't reach until Galen in Greece, more than 1,000 years afterward, in the realm of irrigation engineering, which enabled thriving societies amid the dry conditions of southern Mesopotamia. We see what might be the Sumerians' most vital real-world innovation. The network of canals that turned the wetlands between the Tigris and Euphrates into antiquity's richest farmlands demanded deep expertise in water flow, land measurement, and large-scale workforce coordination. Far from basic trenches, these formed intricate water control infrastructures complete with controls, feeder lines, outflow systems, and upkeep rules, all recorded on bureaucratic records and upheld by legal standards. Ancient writings credit this progress. Literacy, math, jurisprudence, healing practices, and technical designs to guidance from the gods. The legendary Abgalu, or Seven Sages in Sumerian lore, were half-divine entities linked to Enki, portrayed as the instructors who imparted the skills of urban life to humans during the dawn of time. The Babylonian scholar Berossus, authoring in Greek during the 3rd century BCE, portrayed the lead sage Oannes as a creature with a fish's torso but human head and limbs, rising from the ocean to instruct Babylonians in script, knowledge, and various trades and techniques. Modern experts such as the Assyriologist Stephanie Daly link Oannes to the Sumerian figure Adapa, deemed the initial sage dispatched by Enki to guide human progress. Regardless of whether you view these beings as symbolic representations of slow societal evolution or distorted recollections of real mentors, Sumerian accounts remain uniform. Humanity didn't invent these skills independently. We received instruction from higher powers. The issue of how much of that knowledge endured after the instructors left is revealed by the path of progress in technology and thought following the Sumerian era. Certain fields show steady advancement. Babylonian stargazing expanded on Sumerian bases and surpassed them. Judicial frameworks became more refined. Governance structures grew more streamlined. In these spheres, the early groundwork proved solid enough for self-sustained expansion, even without the original builders. Yet in different domains, the path reflects decline. Ancient artifacts emerge that appear remarkably forward-thinking for their time, only to vanish without clear follow-ups. Consider the jar-like contraptions unearthed at Kujut Rabu outside Baghdad, dubbed the Baghdad Batteries, from the Parthian era circa 250 BCE. These clay pots hold copper tubes and iron bars, generating a modest electrical charge when charged with an acid liquid. Their intended use sparks ongoing debate. Certain experts propose they served for gilding silver with gold through electroplating, implying grasp of chemical reactions involving electricity. Skeptics counter they're merely containers. Still, they prompt inquiries into ancient insights that later faded from view. The Antikythera mechanism, salvaged from a Roman period vessel in 1901 and placed around 100 BCE, stands as an astonishing geared analog device for forecasting celestial movements and solar events via interlinked bronze wheels. No equivalent in mechanical intricacy surfaced in Europe for roughly 1,400 more years. This relic shows Hellenistic societies had engineering prowess well ahead of what standard histories imply, talents that evaporated amid the downfall of classical empires and weren't regained until the Middle Ages. Instances such as these, among many, indicate that humanity's tech evolution hasn't followed the steady ascent often depicted in mainstream stories. Insights have been acquired, forgotten, and reclaimed repeatedly. Skills have surfaced, peaked, and evaporated. The shadowy eras after societal breakdowns are genuine, and the revivals afterward frequently mean relearning old wisdom anew, not innovating purely from the ground up. The revival of Greek and Roman scholarship in medieval Europe, channeled through Arabic renditions that echoed Mesopotamian roots, stands as the best recorded instance of this recurring cycle. Yet this cycle could stretch even deeper into antiquity, encompassing the losses tied to or following the exodus detailed in those ancient accounts. Losses from which humanity continues to rebound. Now ease your breath into a slower rhythm. Allow the substance of these layered facts and theories to settle softly upon your mind as we pivot to the query that strikes closest to home. What does this imply for us? For those who trace their lineage to the venture outlined in the old writings, for the heirs to wisdom bestowed and then somewhat reclaimed, for the race fashioned, should the accounts prove accurate, by entities who eventually withdrew from us or from our shared planet. According to the Sumerian king list, Kingship descended anew from the heavens post-flood. Society pieced itself back together. Urban centers emerged once more amid the dust-veiled remnants. Sanctuaries were rebuilt atop the bases of their forebears. Ceremonies endured. Narratives were safeguarded. Across countless human lineages, people gazed upward at the starry expanse, pondering if the deities who had bestowed all would ever reappear. This very anticipation of reappearance might well be the departure's most lasting imprint. As we've noted, it permeates nearly every prominent faith and legend worldwide. Christianity anticipates the second coming. Judaism foresees the Messiah. Islam awaits the Mahdi. Hinduism expects Kalki, Vishnu's 10th incarnation. Buddhism looks to Maitreya. Zoroastrianism heralds the Saoshyant. Every faith encases this hope within its distinct doctrinal shell. Yet the core pattern remains the same. A sacred figure who once arrived has left and shall re-emerge when the moment aligns. When the era concludes, when humankind has either merited or necessitated celestial aid again. Efforts to pinpoint this re-emergence have engrossed thinkers for ages. Drawing from the cyclic frameworks in ancient lore, projections vary from immediate to vast on a universal scale. The Hindu reckoning of Kali Yuga situates us roughly 5,100 years into a 432,000-year span, implying the re-emergence lingers far off from a stellar viewpoint. In contrast, Christian eschatology has nurtured an aura of nearness for 2 millennia, with every era uncovering signs that it could be the fortunate one to behold the second coming. The Mayan long count calendar, which sparked widespread fascination near its 2012 endpoint, signals the close of a roughly 5,125-year phase, though authentic Mayan records foresee neither doom nor sacred arrival at that juncture. The widespread doomsday reading was mostly a contemporary overlay on an old celestial tally. Zechariah Sitchin's bid to forecast Nibiru's subsequent orbit via a suggested 3,600-year path has captivated enthusiasts of fringe history. Outcomes hinge on the starting point selected, yielding estimates from bygone times to upcoming ones. Conventional astronomy offers no backing for such figures. And while the posited Planet 9 intrigues researchers, it doesn't align with Sitchin's details on Nibiru's trajectory or timing. In truth, no reliable means exist to forecast any such event schedule, assuming it's even a valid notion. Still, the anticipation alone, untethered to precise dates, has deeply molded human society. It has spurred the safeguarding of venerable scrolls through endless transcriptions over epochs. It has fueled the erection of enduring shrines and landmarks meant to withstand millennia. It has propelled stargazing initiatives across generations. It has upheld clerical orders and faiths chiefly tasked with preparing for an awaited occurrence. The act of anticipation has itself fueled key aspects of cultural evolution. We erected societies in no small measure because we presumed observers would arrive to appraise our achievements. Today's quest for cosmic life through science, active in diverse guises since Frank Drake's inaugural 1960 radio scan, embodies this primordial yearning in its most straightforward, non-religious guise. We train antennas toward remote suns. We dispatch craft beyond our solar system. We scrutinize distant worlds' airs for life indicators. We strain to catch transmissions proving our solitude's end. Although the approach of science is rigorous and its goals are presented in purely rational language, the deep-seated drive, the belief that intelligent life thrives elsewhere in the universe, and that reaching out to it is both feasible and worthwhile, echoes the long-held anticipation of the gods' comeback in its core framework. Our gaze toward the heavens stems from the earliest tales that claim that's where they departed. Whether those narratives recount actual occurrences or serve as symbolic lessons might matter less than their profound impact on humanity's progress. Regardless, the legacy endures. Regardless, urban centers rose, wisdom was safeguarded, customs endured, and the skies were observed. Regardless, we emerge as the kind of beings who recall, who gaze skyward, who remain vigilant. And regardless, those primordial writings embed their angular scripts into our minds across 5,000 years of quiet, urging us to notice, to persist in curiosity, to reject the present reality as the ultimate truth. The Assyrian monarch Ashurbanipal, whose vast library safeguarded much of our current knowledge, declared in an inscription that he could decipher the exquisite clay tablets predating the deluge. Even during the 7th century BCE, the leader of the era's mightiest realm glanced back through ages to a pre-disaster epic, accessing lore that was half forgotten and half retained on tablets concealing mysteries that even a self-proclaimed learned king couldn't entirely unravel. Our situation today parallels that one. We decipher the tablets. We interpret nearly all the inscriptions. We unearth the locations, scrutinize the relics, and align the celestial records. Yet the deeper significance escapes us. The whole narrative stays tantalizingly out of reach. And maybe that's fitting. Maybe the enigma isn't a flaw in our techniques, but an integral part of the heritage. Maybe we're intended to continue probing, interpreting, digging, and pondering. Maybe the resolution isn't some revelation to uncover, but an ongoing pursuit to embrace. A bond with history that strengthens through every wave of explorers. With each fresh interpretation, each fresh dig, each fresh inquiry posed amid the hushed desolation of toppled shrines. Now let's turn to the undiscovered elements awaiting us, for the Anunnaki saga isn't just a relic of the past. It's a vibrant area of study, and the rate of pertinent findings has quickened markedly in the last few decades, a trend even doubters can't dismiss. The cuneiform tablets we've decoded amount to only a portion of those recovered, and the recovered ones form just a slice of what's still buried. Projections differ, but the British Museum by itself possesses around 130,000 cuneiform tablets, with maybe only 1/3 completely decoded and released. The Iraq Museum in Baghdad, notwithstanding the severe pillaging amid and following the 2003 invasion, retains tens of thousands more, many untouched by scholars. The University of Pennsylvania Museum, the Louvre, the Vorderasiatisches Atisches Museum in Berlin, the Istanbul Archaeological Museums, Yale University, and scores of other global repositories house further assortments of diverse scales. The overall count of documented cuneiform tablets falls somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million. And the global roster of expert cuneiform scholars able to interpret them numbers roughly 300 to 400. The sheer scale ensures that most of what the ancient Mesopotamians inscribed stays unexamined. Irving Finkel from the British Museum, among the leading authorities, has captured this reality with his signature flair. He points out that tablets keep appearing from museum vaults untouched for generations, and every fresh analysis could reshape our grasp of ancient Mesopotamian insights and convictions. His unearthing of the Ark tablet, a hitherto obscure flood account featuring precise building instructions for the rescue craft, proved that significant literary breakthroughs can arise not just from fresh digs, but from thorough reviews of held archives. That particular tablet had lingered in storage since the 1980s, overlooked and undervalued until Finkel took a look. Fresh digs in the core Mesopotamian region keep yielding surprises. Despite the fieldwork hurdles posed by turmoil in Iraq and Syria since 2003, the 2015 unearthing of an unidentified Assyrian carving at Fair in northern Iraq, portraying the Assyrian sovereign advancing ahead of a procession of gods astride mythical beasts, supplied fresh pictorial clues to how the ancient Assyrians envisioned their celestial guardians. Current digs at Girsu in southern Iraq, led by the British Museum alongside Iraqi officials, keep uncovering fresh insights into Sumerian temple design and governance. Every digging campaign yields additional cuneiform tablets, artifacts, and data that sharpen our grasp of the society behind the Anunnaki stories. Employing cutting-edge tech on these old relics has unlocked analysis methods beyond the dreams of earlier researchers. For instance, CT scans let us peer inside sealed clay bulli, those protective wrappers for certain tablets, without damaging them. Multispectral imaging brings faded inscriptions on marred tablets back to life, text that's otherwise undetectable without aids. AI-driven translation software, though nascent, is advancing quickly and could soon handle tablet decipherment far faster than the limited cadre of cuneiform experts ever could. The Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative, a joint venture among various universities and museums, is methodically scanning and posting the globe's cuneiform holdings online, forging the first all-encompassing archive of Mesopotamian writings. Over the last 20 years, breakthroughs in genetics have enriched our probe into human beginnings, a topic echoed in those ancient writings. The human genome sequencing, wrapped up in 2003, advances in pulling ancient DNA from digs and piecing together population histories have spotlighted parts of our evolutionary past that stayed hidden before. Proof of mating between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals via research from Svante Pääbo and his group at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology showed our DNA bears clear traces of blending with other hominid branches. That finding snagged Pääbo the 2022 Nobel in Physiology or Medicine and confirmed our lineage's deep intermingling with kin species. Later finds of Denisovan DNA in today's humans piled on more evidence of such crossings. Genetically, we're a patchwork creation, harboring echoes from diverse hominid groups that crossed paths in deep time. This doesn't validate the Sumerian tales of godly human fusions. Science ties the mixing to fellow human types, not spacefarers. Yet it sets a key example. We've got a verified record of gene swapping with near but not quite like beings. Knowing that, the old lore of deities coupling with mortals for hybrid kids hits harder, even if the partners were earthly, not heavenly. Research on human population squeezes has turned up patterns that intriguingly align with those myths. Genetic studies pinpoint times in our distant past when species-wide variety plummeted, signaling a plunge in overall numbers to mere handfuls. The latest major pinch hit around 12,000 to 15,000 years back, syncing with the younger Dryas Chill and the era of flood legends. A 2011 Nature paper by the group under Luis Quintana Murci highlighted global human shrinkage then, hinting at a disaster slashing numbers to maybe just thousands. What lingers unexplained in our DNA opens yet another angle. Vast swaths of the human genome hold non-coding stretches that skip protein making and whose roles we barely fathom. These make up roughly 98% of it. And while quote 20 is mostly debunked now, acknowledging regulatory and scaffolding jobs in much of it, plenty stays a mystery. The ENCODE project's huge team effort, rolling out 2012 findings, argued that 80% or more shows some biochemical activity, though what exactly many bits do eludes us. Inside every one of us lies an enormous, partly unread genetic tome. Whether our genetic archive reflects solely the outcomes of natural evolution, or perhaps holds signs of the intentional alterations outlined in those ancient writings, remains a puzzle that today's science can't settle for certain, though upcoming studies in genomics might shed light on it. Allow your eyelids to gently shut if they're still open. Imagine the edge of exploration unfolding ahead, like the endless sands beyond Eridu's ancient remains, extending in all directions. We're just starting to grasp these mysteries, far from wrapping them up. The technologies at our disposal, genomic sequencing, satellite-based archaeology, computational linguistics, sophisticated materials testing, deep space monitoring, offer powers unimaginable to the 19th century experts who first deciphered cuneiform, and the inquiries those pioneers posed about humanity's beginnings, the reality or withdrawal of divine forces, the significance of our earliest surviving tales, feel even more pressing today than in their era. Consider the 2017 New York Times disclosure of the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, followed by the creation of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, the declassification of military videos capturing unidentified aerial phenomena with flight behaviors defying known physics, and the congressional sessions where service members swore testimony about brushes with mysterious objects. These developments have revived, in our contemporary skeptical world, a query that Mesopotamian records tackled with striking detail. Do non-human minds engage with Earth? The ancients answered affirmatively and gave them names. Today's administrations are starting to admit that entities exist without clarifying their nature. Linking old chronicles to current events is conjectural and should be handled cautiously. Patterns spanning thousands of years don't prove cause and effect. Psychology has long noted our instinct to spot connections that might not exist. The fact that unidentified aerial phenomena echo certain traits of the sacred chariots in ancient lore could stem from little more than the restricted language people use for the inexplicable. Glowing sky objects get portrayed similarly throughout history simply because options for such descriptions are limited. Yet the parallels persist. Sumerian writings recount entities descending from above in radiant crafts that glided silently and ignored usual laws of movement. Recent defense accounts detail crafts emitting brilliant glows, propelled by no visible means, reaching speeds and maneuvers beyond any existing tech, and seeming to bypass inertia and gravity. Do these accounts capture the identical events witnessed over epochs, or just humanity's uniform way of processing the unfamiliar? Prudent investigation must keep that debate alive. Undeniable, however, are the ancient documents themselves, their vivid depictions delivered with such uniformity and precision that they warrant thoughtful study, not offhand rejection. Whatever the Sumerians encountered, be it genuine meetings with extraterrestrial beings, the elevation of exceptional human figures to godhood, the poetic framing of natural events, or another reality altogether, they deemed it vital enough to etch into enduring clay, to safeguard and replicate for millennia, and to hand down as the core legend of our shared heritage. Those clay tablet inscribers weren't crafting tales for leisure. They documented what their heritage deemed factual chronicle, the tale of creation as we know it, humanity's genesis, and the rationale for the deity's retreat. They inscribed with precision. They guarded it with diligence. They regarded it as their society's paramount wisdom. At the very least, we should honor them by approaching their legacy with gravity, scrutinizing it as meticulously as they did, weighing its assertions against our insights, noting alignments and discrepancies, and pondering how our knowledge voids might eventually close. As we near the end of this extended voyage, Eridu's weathered structures endure on Iraq's southern flats, drawing more scholars than worshippers these days, yet persisting all the same. The tablets repose in global museum storerooms and archives stacks. Those cuneiform markings remain as crisp as when they were first inscribed, enduring with the steadfastness of clay, until another seeker lifts them and deciphers the urgent truths the old scribes fought to etch forever. The sacred sites endure too, their buried bases sketching the shapes of holy realms that once pulsed with divine energies long since vanished. And the heavens persist, unchanged from the vast dome the Sumerian stargazers observed with unwavering precision, the very expanse they claimed the gods plunged from and eventually ascended back to. Whether the Anunnaki truly existed remains a mystery. Whether they hailed from distant planets, alternate realms, or the fertile minds of a society grappling with its abrupt leap into ordered life, we simply cannot say. The Great Deluge, was it heavenly retribution, earthly disaster, stellar assault, or a blend of such forces? Unknown. Their exit, escape, summons, tactical retreat, or just the dimming of a once bright legacy? Unclear. The vow of their return, genuine foretelling, political ploy, or that timeless human yearning for reclaiming what's gone? We lack certainty. But here's what stands firm. The earliest society to etch its legacy on clay recounted tales of sky-born entities, beings who forged humankind via methods eerily akin to biomanipulation, who imparted the skills of urban life, who soured on their handiwork, who sought its annihilation, then relented, who slowly receded, and who bequeathed a race forever probing the past, the reasons for departure, and the chance of reappearance. This chronicle endures in humanity's toughest script, outlasting invasions, deluges, blazes, imperial downfalls, tongue extinctions, faith's ebbs and flows, and the relentless erosion of 5 millennia. It stays readable. It holds together. It echoes the same curiosities we ponder gazing at the night sky, struck by that primal, wordless pull toward the unknown, impossible to dismiss. No resolutions needed this evening. Just your readiness to embrace those queries, to marvel, to link into the endless thread of curiosity begun by the initial writer who gripped a stylus and scored wet earth, compelled to immortalize a truth worth lasting. You're woven into that lineage today. After absorbing this tale, following its threads, balancing proofs against guesses amid the wide unknowns bridging fact and fancy, you advance the legacy of those who reject quiet as the end. The celestial sphere turns deliberately above. The sands chill. The ancient stones wait steadfast in shadow, guarding their enigmas with the unyielding poise they've shown over 7,000 years. And amid the immense voids linking realms, likelihoods, and realities, eras old and new, dream and awareness, the narrative unfolds not as a sealed tale with tidy closure, but as an unanswered riddle, a vital enigma, a call to persist in pursuit, interpretation, unearthing, and skyward glances. Inhale steadily. Allow your form to ease into slumber. Permit the heavy span of ages to envelop you, not as oppression, but as a comforting shroud, enfolding you in the same gloom that cradled the old ritualists awaiting deities who never arrived, who burned offerings in forsaken shrines, who upheld their watch through ages because an instinct in their core whispered that the hush was fleeting, the void not eternal, and the saga they'd sworn to safeguard would eventually reveal its purpose. You bear their endowment in your daily rhythm. 60 minutes per hour, 60 ticks per minute, the Sumerian Base 6 framework marking your days. You hold it in the star patterns you spot above, charted and labeled by Babylonian skywatchers. You hold it in the justice tenets safeguarding your freedoms, rooted in those pioneering Sumerian laws. You hold it in the script you scan, refined from Phoenician roots tied to cuneiform origins. You hold it in the sheer impulse to question beginnings, makers. The point of being amid a universe potentially teeming with life and wonders beyond the smug certainties of today's rationalism. Drift into repose now. Let the inquiries pause. Let the inscribed stones lie serene in their displays, the remnants hush in arid quiet, the lights hold steady in their timeless paths. Dawn brings the labor onward, digs restart, renderings advance, clues build, puzzles intensify. Yet for this night, your voyage suffices. You've encountered the enigma, you've sensed its gravity, you've merited some repose. And should your slumber lead you to stand at the foot of a ziggurat bathed in the golden hues of a Mesopotamian dusk, observing the priests climb those timeless steps bearing gifts for deities, long vanished over thousands of years, realize that you're far from solitary in that vision. Countless people over vast stretches of time have occupied that very conceptual realm, gazing upward along that hallowed incline, pondering the identical insoluble query that the cuneiform tablets imprint upon our awareness with the subtle persistence of communications destined never to fade. Where have they vanished to? Might they come back? And what form will humanity have taken by then? The quietude cradles these inquiries, much like the soil embraces the buried tablets yet to be unearthed, enduringly, utterly poised for the revelation that could arrive tomorrow, or in a millennium, or perhaps not at all. Within that enduring hush, in that readiness to endure uncertainty, absent resolution, devoid of the misleading solace from hasty solutions, lies an essence nearing tranquility, nearing insight, an essence that those ancient writers, etching their styluses into wet clay beneath the gentle glow of oil lamps 5 millennia past, would surely identify as precisely their aim, not a resolution, but the dawn of the proper inquiry. Rest soundly. The tale endures for your awakening, steadfast as clay, timeless as the heavens, poised, just as we've perpetually lingered in anticipation of the ensuing chapter. Yet prior to sleep enveloping you entirely, allow us to pause briefly in yet another alcove of this venerable narrative. For certain elements remain unexamined, warranting your focus. Elements concerning the events right after the Exodus that molded all subsequent developments. Elements regarding how the severance of godly interaction reshaped not merely faith, but the fundamental framework of human civilization. The shift from divine rule to earthly authority in Mesopotamia, captured with remarkable clarity in the digs and writings, uncovers the tangible outcomes of celestial retreat. In the initial eras, the temple stood as the hub of both spiritual and financial activity. Temple lands oversaw enormous farmlands. Clerics oversaw storage silos, craft areas, and commerce ventures. The sacred domain truly powered the city's finances, with the deity's command underpinning every layer of communal order. This framework, termed the temple economy by experts, operated under the belief that the heavenly overseer remained active, that the gods' directives steered the sharing of assets, that the full machinery of creation and exchange fulfilled godly aims executed via priestly agents. Upon the heavenly overseer's exit, the financial and managerial frameworks required restructuring. Documents from the late 3rd and early 2nd millennia BCE depict this realignment unfolding before our eyes. Monarchical power grew to occupy the void from fading godly involvement. The ruler, formerly the deity's caretaker, evolved into the deity's stand-in, taking over roles once reserved for the ethereal realm. The intricate royal designations of Mesopotamian sovereigns, asserting godly lineage and universal decree, serve as efforts to bolster a crumbling base of legitimacy. Should the gods cease to manifest tangibly to validate the societal hierarchy, the sovereign had to adopt godly traits to sustain that validating role. This evolution's repercussions reached well past governance. The emergence of individual spirituality, the notion that people ought to forge unmediated bonds with higher powers, arose in Mesopotamia exactly amid this era of official, godly absence. Prior rituals were group-oriented and structured, channeled solely through the temple and its clergy. Everyday Mesopotamians seldom formed private ties with the major deities. They joined group ceremonies, added to shared tributes, and gained group safeguarding via the temple's effective operations. Yet with the major deities receding, temples falling mute, the rift between promised divinity and actual presence stretching into an impassable divide, a fresh phenomenon surfaced in the archives. Solitary supplications, personal dirges, covert acts of piety aimed at lesser divinities or guardian entities that could yet reply when the mighty ones stayed unresponsive. The ascent of individualized guardian gods in Mesopotamian belief during the 2nd millennium BCE, thoroughly charted by researchers such as Thorkild Jacobson in his pivotal 1976 volume, The Treasures of Darkness, signifies a popular spiritual pivot to cope with the void left by the supreme deities. Perhaps lesser spirits like Enlil and other celestial beings became unavailable too. In that case, a personal deity tied to a single person or household might offer the spiritual link that people inherently crave. Individuals interacted with these guardians in ways that felt profoundly close, something unimaginable back in the era of rigid temple-based worship. Invocations to such deities employed words evoking a parent's affection, urgent pleas, and deep personal bonds, standing in stark opposition to the stiff, structured rhetoric of the grand anthems. This shift feels both poignant and sorrowful at once. With the creators who shaped humankind out of reach, people reached for any lingering sacred forces, inventing fresh modes of faith to bridge the gap left by their exit. Such changes weren't unique to Mesopotamia. They unfolded across all regions chronicled in the Exodus stories, varying in timing and cultural flavors. The Axial Age, a term coined by philosopher Karl Jaspers in 1949 to capture the era from about 800 to 200 BCE, when profound shifts in religion and thought emerged at once in Greece, India, China, Persia, and the Near East, could well stem from that full withdrawal. During this time, figures like Confucius, the Buddha, Zoroaster, the prophets of Israel, Greek thinkers, and Jainism's pioneers crafted novel ways to grasp the bond between mortals and the sacred. These approaches supplanted the prior paradigm of immediate godly interaction with ones focused on moral behavior, rational exploration, inner contemplation, and self-driven spiritual growth as routes to the beyond. In this view, the Axial Age visionaries weren't inventing faiths from scratch. They were crafting answers to the core dilemma that Sumerian clergy had wrestled with for ages. The deities have vanished. Unmediated encounters with the divine have ended. So, how do we conduct our lives? How do we pursue purpose? How do we structure our communities and personal worlds without the absolute assurance of a tangible heavenly oversight? Their solutions: moral one-God worship, logical reasoning, contemplative elevation, held such sway that they molded human society for over 2,500 years, influencing it still. Even today's scientific boom can be interpreted, if one adopts this lens, as an outcome of that absence. In the era when gods roamed among us, as the records claim, wisdom arrived as a gift. It flowed downward. It came from celestial teachers whose insights humans were urged to accept, not challenge. Once those teachers withdrew, the system of handed-down wisdom slowly crumbled. Without deities to unveil realities, people needed to forge their own paths to uncover truths. At heart, the scientific approach, the deliberate probing of the world via watching, theorizing, and testing, serves as a means to gain insight, son heavenly help. It's the instrument of a kind that's been abandoned to puzzle things out solo, and we've excelled at it remarkably. Over the past about 5,000 years from when Sumerian writers noted the Anunnaki's exit, our species has advanced from simple reed pens on mud slabs to chip-based computing and worldwide data webs. We've unraveled the atom's blueprint, the makeup of celestial bodies, DNA's framework, and the cosmos's timeline to mere moments after its birth. We've escaped Earth and stepped onto the lunar surface. We've launched mechanical envoys to the solar system's fringes. We've built machine minds that handle data volumes and velocities beyond any organic brain's grasp. If the Anunnaki departed out of worry over our potential, the proof indicates their concern was justified. We've turned remarkable. In some narrow yet real ways, we've attained a divine stature. Still, the yearning endures. The drive toward faith hasn't dimmed. The feeling that a piece is absent, that our command of science hasn't resolved the profoundest riddles, that worldly advances haven't sealed the emptiness from that withdrawal, this awareness saturates contemporary life as much as it infused Sumer's ancient dirges. We might be the planet's most skilled and unsettled creatures ever. We can achieve nearly everything, but cease pondering the queries those old writings first sparked. What is our origin? What purpose do we serve? Are we solitary? And if not, where have the rest vanished to? The clay records don't resolve these. They ignite them. These ancient writings force those inquiries into our minds with the jagged points of their uneven cuneiform marks, lodging them firmly in our shared memory, where they burrow further with every era that discovers them. Maybe that's the true purpose of these old documents, not to deliver solutions, but to make sure the puzzles endure forever. To make certain that no matter how far we progress, no matter what secrets we uncover, no matter how much we resemble deities in our achievements, we'll always gaze skyward at the constellations and ponder whether something up there is gazing back at us. Darkness settles over the remnants of antiquity, where the stars shine with a sharpness that urban glows have robbed from our contemporary nights. Yet out in the wilderness, amid the quiet, in those timeless spots where the baked clay still bears the traces of humanity's earliest writings, the firmament remains as immense, shadowy, and brimming with mysteries as it did when Sumer's holy men ascended their towering platforms at twilight and launched their evening watch, scanning the cosmos for hints of divine comeback, tallying the wandering orbs, noting the portents, upholding the steadfast routine of scrutiny that blended inquiry with devotion. Calculation with aspiration. Those watchers have vanished. Their era of vigilance closed with them. Yet the riddles they posed linger in the evening breeze, push against the hush, and still seek resolutions that 5 millennia of our striving haven't supplied. As their remote descendants, we carry forward their curiosities, their yearnings, and their remarkable talent for blending exacting analysis with boundless awe. We sustain the watch on our terms, using our tools, propelled by that timeless drive that refuses to release us fully. Rest easy now. You've merited it. The enigmas can hold until dawn. The inscribed slabs can endure another 5,000 years if required. And whatever lurks in the expansive quiet amid the celestial bodies, it has bided its time this long. It can pause a bit more as you recharge, but there's one more strand to trace before the final glow dims and slumber overtakes you completely. A strand woven into the very terrain via the patterns of rock and soil that early peoples crafted, not just in Mesopotamia, but worldwide. Edifices whose orientations, dimensions, and embedded data surpass the societies that erected them. Over the last 100 years, experts in mapping and excavation have charted the exactness of these old landmarks' positions with growing expertise. The Great Pyramid at Giza points to true north within about 3/60 of 1 degree, a level of accuracy that European constructors didn't achieve until the 1700s. Angkor Wat in Cambodia reflects the Draco constellation from roughly 10,500 BCE. As detailed by scholars like John Grigsby and Graham Hancock, Peru's Nazca lines, immense earth drawings seen best from above, feature ties to solstice markers and stellar spots, which the German mathematician Maria Reich catalogued over decades. The megalithic rings across the British Isles, from Stonehenge to Scotland's Callanish stones, reveal stellar connections that the Oxford engineer Alexander Thom recorded through years of careful measurement, sharing his results in books such as Megalithic Sites in Britain, 1967, and Megalithic Lunar Observatories, 1971. Such orientations might stem from diligent human watching and technical prowess. No otherworldly cause is necessary. People can attain remarkable exactitude when driven and coordinated, and celestial positioning is possible via basic tracking techniques over adequate periods. Still, the worldwide spread of these accurately oriented sites, their clustering in particular epochs, and their seeming inclusion of numerical and stellar insights beyond the builder's immediate uses, these elements point to a shared legacy of holy design that prized accuracy for deeper motives than mere utility. Sumerian records portray the deities mapping out settlements based on heavenly blueprints, positioning holy zones to match sky objects, constructing initial shrines as links in a system binding the world below to the realms above. Whether this means actual godly urban design or symbolic assertions of universal rule, digs confirm that Mesopotamian settlements were truly sky-oriented. Babylon's temple to Marduk, for instance, faced the equinox dawn. The parade route to the Ishtar Gate traced a path linking the terrestrial sanctuary to its protecting God's heavenly spot. These weren't chance setups. They were intentional imprints of the bond between soil and ether, between mortal dwellings and godly structure. If this kind of encoding was intentional, the monuments themselves turn into a kind of script, a lexicon of rock and precise orientations that endures without needing anyone to be literate. Scripts can fade from memory. Tongues can vanish. Tablets of clay can get buried and forgotten. Yet a structure aligned exactly to magnetic north will hold that direction steadfast while it endures. A ring of stone set to the solstice will reveal its purpose silently, twice a year, to any observer who bothers to watch. In many ways, the celestial insights embedded in these structures represent the toughest kind of archive humanity has devised. It lasts not through recollection of its code, but because the universe supplies the cipher. Dawn breaks in the same spot it always did. The heavens rotate as they ever have. The sightlines remain fixed where the builders aim them. All it takes is someone to notice. And maybe, after thousands of years of striding by these relics unread, that's exactly what we're achieving now. Following ages of shrugging off their accuracy as chance or crediting it to endless toil and raw strength, after years of meticulous mapping, gauging, and scrutiny, we're starting to decipher the rock inscriptions the ancients placed beside their clay versions. We're coming to see that the wisdom in these structural orientations isn't distinct from the lore kept in standardized tablets. It's a counterpart to it. Twin expressions of one core idea, dual pathways for the same broadcast, paired strategies to guarantee that the essentials would weather the extended hush after the exit. The core idea, if we dare label it so, echoes steadily through both mediums. We share ties with the universe. Our beginnings draw on powers and entities outside the earthly realm. Rhythms shape the bond between the skies and the soil, between mortals and the superhuman, between what's seen and what's hidden. Grasping these rhythms stands as the greatest treasure any society can claim, and safeguarding that grasp in any lasting format ranks as the supreme obligation of its guardians. The Sumerians met that obligation with profound commitment. They inscribed their insights on clay, aware that it outlives fragile scrolls or hides. They raised their shrines on bases meant to persist beyond the edifices atop them. They charted the constellations with such exactness that later stargazers could confirm their findings over vast epochs, and they shared their tale. The tale of the Anunnaki, of genesis and disaster and withdrawal, relayed with a steadfastness and richness that has weathered 5,000 years of societal shifts, regime collapses, language mutations, and academic debates to reach your mind this evening, still as striking, as disquieting, and as open-ended as when the initial writer shaped the first cuneiform mark into damp earth and set to work. Carry that scene with you as you drift toward rest. A writer bathed in the gentle glow of a lamp fueled by oil perched on a woven rush in a chamber linked to a sanctuary whose deity has just vanished. The space is still. The shrine is still. The town past the barriers feels even emptier than before. The world lacks something vital. The writer senses it in the void, a mute space where once the resonant presence of the divine pulsed through the holy grounds, though he can't quite articulate it. He takes the stylus, moistens its tip, imprints the carved rush into the yielding, moist face of a new clay slab, and starts inscribing, for that's the human response when the deities fall quiet. We document, we archive, we safeguard, we hand it on, and we